he had already observed how the very air near the transformers could be rendered strangely self-luminous. This was a light like no high-frequency coil ever could produce, a corona of white brilliance which expanded to ever larger diameters. The light from Tesla transformers continually expands. Tesla described the glowing column of light which surrounds any elevated line which is connected to one of his transformers. Unlike common high-frequency alternations, Tesla radiant energy effects grow in time. Tesla recognized the reason for this temporal growth process. There were no reversals in the source discharges. Therefore, the radiant energy would never remove the work performed on any space or material so exposed. As with the unidirectional impulse discharges, the radiant electric effects were additive and accumulative. In this respect, Tesla observed energy magnifications which seemed totally anomalous to ordinary engineering convention. It was easy to control the brilliance of a room by controlling the voltage in his transformers. The light from this sort of illumination was curiously bright to human perception, but nearly impossible to photograph on film. Tesla found it necessary to make long-time exposures of his discharges before the faintest sort of streamers could be made visible. This strange inability to register photographically was contrasted against the brilliance perceived in the eyes, one which required delicate control. Tesla also designed, built, and utilized large globe lamps, which required only a single external plate for receiving the radiant energies. However distantly placed from the radiant source, these lamps became brilliantly illuminated. Theirs was a brilliance approaching that of an arc lamp, and exceeding any of the conventional Edison filament lamps by several factors. It was also easy for Tesla to control the heat of any space. By controlling both the voltage and impulse duration of energy in his transformers, Tesla could heat up a room. Cool breezes could also be arranged by appropriately setting the impulse duration. The key to producing all etheric action was to secure a means for actually affecting etheric deviations, the very thing now possessed by Tesla alone. Sir Oliver Lodge stated that the only means for getting at the ether was an electrical means, but not one member of the Royal Society of London had been able to achieve this feat, with the rare exception of Sir William Crookes. The Tesla method used ether to modify ether. The secret was separating the contaminants from the etheric current at the very source of generation, a feat which he had achieved in his transformers and magnetic arc disruptors. Tesla used the violence of magnetically disrupted arc discharges to chaoticize electronic and etheric carriers in metallic conductors, breaking the agglomerations which bind them together. Each component was free to separate. This condition could not be achieved in arc discharges where currents were allowed to alternate. In such apparatus, the electronic carriers overwhelmed the release of ether, and while ether was present in the discharge, could never be separated from the composite current. The extraordinary efficiency of the magnetic arc disruptor in developing etheric currents derived from several principles. Tesla saw that electrical current was really a complex combination of ether and electrons. When electricity was applied to the disruptor, a primary fractioning process took place. Electrons were forcibly expelled from the gap by the strong magnetic influence. The ether streams, neutral in charge, remained flowing through the circuit. The magnetic disruptor was his primary means for fractionating the electrons from the ether particles. Ether particles were extremely mobile, virtually massless when compared with electrons, and could therefore pass through matter with very little effort. Electrons could not keep up with either the velocity or the permeability of etheric particles. According to this view, ether particles were infinitesimals, very much smaller than electrons themselves. The etheric carriers contained momentum. Their extreme velocity matched their nearly massless nature, the product of both becoming a sizable quantity. They moved with superluminal velocity, a result of their incompressible and massless nature. Whenever a directed radiant matter impulse begins from some point in space, an incompressible movement occurs instantaneously through space to all points along that path. Such movement occurs as a solid ray, an action defying modern considerations of signal retardations in space. Incompressible ray lines can move through any distance simultaneously, instantly. Should the path be 300,000 kilometers long, the impulse at the source end will reach that point as quickly as at all other points. This is superluminal velocity, instantaneous propagation. Radiant matter behaved incompressibly. In effect, this stream of radiant matter, virtually massless and hydrodynamically incompressible, was a pure energy, radiant energy. Here was a distinct phenomenon, one which did not in fact manifest with other than impulse applications. Tesla alternately called these pure etheric expulsions radiant matter and radiant energy. Neutral in charge and infinitesimal in both mass and cross-section, radiant energy was unlike any light seen since his work was concluded. Asked if radiant energy can be compared with any existing physical item today, one would have to decline. We cannot draw parallels between radiant energy and the light energies which science has long been preoccupied. But if light-like at all, radiant energy is possessed of qualities unlike any light which we have learned to generate. And this is precisely the problem. Tesla technology is impulse technology. Without the disruptive, unidirectional impulse, there are no radiant energy effects. Generating this radiant energy requires special energetic applications of succinct and brief impulses. These impulses must be generated through the explosive agency of a disruptive discharge, just as Tesla described. This concludes that portion of the book, Secrets of Cold War Technology by Jerry Vassilatos, which I care to enter into our discussion this evening. In spite of the length of this recital, I have actually edited out a number of concurrent themes to focus strictly on the material that I thought immediately relevant to tonight's thesis. Anyone interested in advanced electrical science or even accurate scientific history should read and study this volume. I have for the last couple of months tried to acquire a copy of Tesla's lecture, The Dissipation of Electricity. So far I've been unsuccessful, so I can't go back to that document to verify Jerry's analysis. However, I felt that it was such a different way of looking at Tesla's work that I simply could not ask you, the audience, just to take it on faith that these are the facts. I was forced to go back through the kinds of material that almost anyone has available on Tesla these days, including the very large volume Nikola Tesla Lectures, Patents, Articles. and I was able to find what I believe is more than enough evidence to support Jerry's analysis of Tesla's work. What I would like to share with you now are some of those documents, and I promise we'll get back to gray soon enough. This quote is taken from Tesla's article, The Problems of Increasing Human Energy, that first appeared in Century magazine in June of 1900. And I'm going to read to you what's in this yellow box here, and it says, "Since I described these simple principles of telegraphy without wires, I have had frequent occasion to note that the identical features and elements have been used in the evident belief that the signals were being transmitted to considerable distances by Hertzian radiations. This is only one of the many misapprehensions to which the investigations of the lamented physicist have given rise. About 33 years ago, Maxwell, following up on the suggestive experiment made by Faraday in 1845, evolved an ideally simple theory which intimately connected light, radiant heat, and electrical phenomena, interpreting them as being all due to vibrations of a hypothetical fluid of inconceivable tenuity called the ether. No experimental verification was arrived at until Hertz, at the suggestion of Helmholtz, undertook a series of experiments to this effect. Hertz proceeded with extraordinary ingenuity and insight, but devoted very little energy to the perfection of his old-fashioned apparatus. The consequence was that he failed to observe the important function which the air played in the experiments, and which I subsequently discovered. Repeating his experiments and reaching different results, I ventured to point out this oversight. The strength of the proofs brought forward by Hertz in support of Maxwell's theory resided in the correct estimate of the rates of vibration of the circuits he used. As I ascertained that he could not have obtained the rates he thought he was getting, the vibrations with identical apparatus he employed are, as a rule, much slower, this being due to the presence of air, which produces a dampening effect upon a rapidly vibrating electrical circuit with high pressure, as a fluid does upon a vibrating tuning fork. I have, however, discovered since that time other causes of error, and I have long ago ceased to look upon his results as an experimental verification of the poetical concepts of Maxwell. The work of the great German physicist has acted as an immense stimulus to contemporary electrical research, but it has likewise, in a measure, by its fascination, paralyzed the scientific mind, and thus hampered independent inquiry. Every new phenomena which was discovered was made to fit the theory, and so, very often, the truth has been unconsciously distorted. Well, obviously Tesla did not agree with the work of Helmholtz, Hertz, and Maxwell. For anyone out there in the audience who does not know who these people are, Hermann von Helmholtz is the author of what is now known the first law of thermodynamics, which states that energy can be changed from one form to another, but it is neither created nor destroyed. James Clerk Maxwell's equations are the backbone of modern electromagnetic theory. And Heinrich Hertz's supposed verification of Maxwell's work was deemed so important that they named the measurement of frequency after him. So these esteemed gentlemen are pivotal personalities in the way science is taught today. But as we can see, Tesla dismissed them all as not being relevant to his experimental findings. In other words, if we follow this path back into the ethers, we must be willing to leave behind the ideas and limitations defined by the first law of thermodynamics and Maxwell's equations.
Amen.
What we are going to look at lies outside the realm where these tools are useful. We're going to move into a completely different realm of study. Moving on, here is a closing remark from another article published in March of 1904. Tesla states, "When the great truth, accidentally revealed and experimentally confirmed, is fully recognized, that this planet, with all its appalling immensity, is to electrical currents virtually no more than a small metal ball, and by this fact many possibilities, each baffling imagination and of incalculable consequence, are rendered absolutely sure of accomplishment. When the first plan is inaugurated, and it is shown that a telegraphic message, almost as secret and non-interferable as a thought, can be transmitted to any terrestrial distance, the sound of the human voice, with all its intonations and inflections, faithfully and instantly reproduced at any other point on the globe, the energy of a waterfall made available for supplying light, heat, or motive power anywhere on land or sea or high in the air, humanity will be like an ant-heap stirred up with a stick. See the excitement coming." Well, here it sounds like Tesla really has something astonishing. He understands it, and he expects it to be unlimited. Something that is way beyond anything that has been ever done before. Even now, we're only getting to a place in the world 100 years later where many of these situations are possible. At least as far as transmitting human voice and things like this, but certainly not with regard to energy being available everywhere on land, sea, or air. Clearly, Tesla is referring to something that was not brought into full public manifestation. So the question is, what was Tesla doing? What evidence do we have that Tesla was working on the kinds of systems that Mr. Vassilatos was talking about in his book? Let's quickly review the evidence that Tesla was working on circuits with spark gaps and trying to get higher and higher spark gap discharge speeds. Here we have one of his many patents in the Lectures, Patents, Articles books called Electrical Circuit Controller. This is one that's very interesting because it consists of two electric motors, each turning in opposite directions. And a spark gap in between the two moving members. So he was clearly trying to get higher and higher speeds than just rotating one member. These would rotate in opposite directions. So here is clear evidence where we have a mechanical spark gap controller, as Jerry suggested in his early work, that he's trying to get the speed as high as he possibly can. Here's an illustration of a magnetically quenched spark gap. It doesn't use permanent magnets, it uses electrical magnets, because later in his experiments he wanted to vary the strength of that to help tune his circuits. This is one of the many experiments to blow out or quench a spark discharge. You'll see this one's very interesting because it is obviously designed for a DC spark, because DC spark discharges didn't start very easily. And you can see the spring-loaded handles here. You could tap on one end of one of these and bring the spark mechanisms closer together to start to draw the initial spark. Then they would spring back to their preset distances, so you could get a DC spark discharge started under these very difficult conditions. Here's another illustration where Tesla is blowing hot air across a spark discharge path. And actually, when you read about this one in the text, there's also a magnetic field present. So here he's using both hot air and magnetic field with a spark gap in this apparatus. So he's clearly looking into a wide variety of possibilities to get more controllable spark discharges, and very obviously DC spark discharges with high voltage. Here's the cover sheet of the patent called Electrical Transformer. In this he states that this is the invention that he plans to employ in constructing improved coils and a manner of using them for transmitting energy over long distances. I've included the illustration from this patent, and we can clearly see that he has the construct that Jerry was talking about, just a few turns in the primary, and a conical coil in the secondary. So all the structures that Jerry was talking about here are present. Here we have another patent, Tesla patent, called Art of Transmitting Electrical Energy Through the Natural Mediums. And here again we see the same basic structure of source B here, powering a 2-turn primary with a spiral coil in the middle of it. In this case, this was for broadcasting energy. So E prime down here
is that ground?
Is the connection to the earth, and E up here is what he called his elevated capacitance. This was the heart of the magnifying transmitter system to broadcast energy to all points on the planet that he attempted to construct at Wardenclyffe, New York. Now, what was interesting about this is his source for this system, B. When you look at this diagram, B looks like a simple generator. But let's go back to the patent and read about this. Here we have some of the text from that patent, and it states right here, in Figure 1, A designates a primary coil forming part of a transformer and consisting generally of a few turns of stout cable of inappreciable resistance, the ends of which are connected to the terminals of a source of power for electrical oscillations, diagrammatically represented by B. This source is usually a condenser charged to a high potential and discharged in rapid succession through the primary, as in a type of transformer invented by me. So I've pulled this little diagram out, and the one on the left here is the one that's directly from the patent, and the one on the right here is what I call Tesla's magnifying transmitter illustration as described in the patent text, showing the capacitor and the disruptive spark gap, in this case a magnetically quenched gap, so he could control the impulse characteristics the way he wanted. Is everybody okay with this? I don't want to change the master's work here, but this is really the circuit he was using. And he used this drawing to just obscure it, but he clearly describes it in the patent. And again, quoting from the text of this patent a little later, Tesla claims, I have found it practicable to produce in this manner an electrical movement thousands of times greater than the initial. So again, he's talking about a tremendous gain in electrical energy here. And going a little bit further up, starting about here, it says, these adjustments and relations being carefully completed and other construction features indicated rigorously observed, the electrical movement produced in the secondary system by the inductive action of the primary A will be enormously magnified. Tesla obviously believed and stated repeatedly that this system was capable of producing more energy out than he was putting in. Today, we call that free energy. Here is more evidence that Jerry's analysis is correct. Again, we go back to the source and we see in this section, here he says, on the apparatus and method of conversion. Conversion of what? Conversion of ordinary electricity into this new form. And we see this generator here, and on the right, or on the left, over here, these are systems that are operating on AC. You can see the slip ring brush is correct, and on this side it's all running on DC, and you can see the commutator, and then there's a little D here and a little A here, so those are the nomenclature. And what we see on the close-up on the DC side, here, this central one here, I'd like to take a look. Here we see a close-up on the DC side. He's taking direct current, running it through another apparatus that the text tells us raises it to an even higher direct current voltage. He charges a capacitor and puts that through a magnetically quenched spark gap to run light bulbs and other apparatus. So here we have direct evidence in Tesla's published writings that he was working with all of these components. Yes, he obscures them in a collection of other possibilities, but the essential elements are all present and explicitly defined. Here's one of my personal favorite quotes from Tesla. He says, "Whatever electricity may be, it is a fact that it behaves like an incompressible fluid, and the earth may be looked upon as an immense reservoir of electricity." Now, mind you, Nikola Tesla is the inventor of the polyphase electrical distribution system used all over the world today. And he says he doesn't know what electricity is, but that it definitely acts like a fluid under pressure. You think supposedly, this is his way of saying ether gas? And again, from the text of the article, Problems of Increasing Human Energy, just reading the highlighted sections here. Finally, however, I had the satisfaction of accomplishing the task undertaken by the use of a new principle, the virtue of which is based on the marvelous properties of the electrical condenser. One of these is that it can discharge or explode its stored energy in an inconceivably short time. Another of its properties, equally valuable, is that its discharge may vibrate at any rate desired up to many millions per second. I arranged such an instrument so as to be charged and discharged alternately in rapid succession through a coil with few turns of stout wire forming the primary of a transformer of induction coil. And then down here it says, electrical effects of any desired character and of intensities undreamed of before are now easily producible by perfected apparatus of this kind, to which frequent reference has been made, and the essential parts of which are shown in Figure 6. For certain purposes, a strong inductive effect is required. For others, the greatest possible suddenness. For others again, an exceptionally high rate of vibration or extreme pressure. While for certain other objects, immense electrical movements are necessary. So here we have ample references in Tesla's own words, which are extremely supportive of Jerry Vassalato's main thesis, that Tesla was working with these things. He was charging capacitors with high voltage DC sources. He was discharging them through magnetically quenched spark gaps, and he was doing this at extremely high rates of vibration, even up to many millions of times per second, and that this was the method of operating his magnifying transmitter, and that this device produces and captures what Tesla called radiant energy. The question is, in spite of all of this written evidence, do we have any direct proof that Tesla's magnifying transmitter produces a different form of electricity? To answer that, I submit this photograph. Taken in 1986 of a discharge from Eric Dollard's magnifying transmitter and provided to me by Tom Brown in New Zealand. The wooden top of the coil is about 8 inches across. The voltage represented by this discharge is anybody's guess, but certainly must be approaching 400,000 volts. The other end of the coil is driving more than 4 amperes into the ground connection, measured on a radio frequency ammeter, and the entire system is drawing less than 2,000 watts from the wall. Here we can see an imperfectly purified etheric discharge, complete with blue dartlets on the edges, as Tesla describes.
What exposure was that on the camera?
I have no idea.
Quick.
Quick,
Yeah.
right.
Well, you wouldn't see the structure staying like that.
At this point, I would like to submit for your serious consideration the idea that all of the material that I read to you from Jerry Vasilato's book, Secrets of Cold War Technology, is essentially correct. To summarize, Tesla accidentally discovered an electrostatic supercharging effect while trying to verify Hertz's discovery of electromagnetic waves. After hundreds of experiments, he learned how to control and maximize this phenomena. This led him to the discovery that electricity is made up of different components that can be separated from each other, and that a pure, gaseous, etheric energy can be fractionated away from the flow of electrons in a circuit designed to produce short-duration, unidirectional impulses. When all the conditions were right, this gaseous, etheric energy would manifest itself as a spatially distributed voltage that would radiate away from the electrical circuit as a light-like ray that could charge other surfaces within the field. From now on, I would like to refer to this phenomena as the electroradiant event and summarize its characteristics as follows. The electroradiant event is produced when a high voltage direct current is discharged across a spark gap and interrupted abruptly. This effect is greatly increased when the source of direct current is a charged capacitor. The electroradiant event leaves wires and other circuit components perpendicular to the flow of current. The electroradiant event produces a spatially distributed voltage that can be thousands of times higher than the initial spark discharge voltage. It propagates instantaneously as a longitudinal electrostatic light-like ray that behaves similarly to an incompressible gas under pressure. Electroradiant effects are solely characterized by impulse duration. Electroradiant effects penetrate all materials and create electronic responses in metals like copper and silver. And in this case, electronic responses means electron movements are initiated. Electroradiant impulses shorter than 100 microseconds are completely safe to handle and will not cause shock or harm. And electroradiant impulses shorter than 100 nanoseconds are cold and easily cause lighting effects in vacuum globes. The electroradiant event is essentially the gain mechanism, which Tesla discovered that is the basis of his magnifying transmitter. It is the basis of his claim that he was able to create more energy in his outputs than it took to initiate them in his inputs. Now, what I'd like to do is go back to Gray. Just so we can understand what this circuit is, on the left, I have the schematic as it is in Gray's patent. And I show the patent number, everything. This part is straight from the patent. On the right, I'm showing what I call my simplified Gray circuit schematic. And I'm using the term schematic here in quotations, and I keep putting it in quotations because it's not entirely a schematic drawing, and we'll get to that shortly. But what I'd like to do first is eliminate a number of components that are redundancies so we can get down to the basic elements of what this circuit is. First of all, this section over here in Figure 5, this is just an alternate way of running the circuit from an AC supply, and we can eliminate that without changing the circuit in any significant way. So over here, I just have the thing running directly from the batteries.
What is the element number 36? What is that device?
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
Secondly, components 42, 44, and 46. 42, 44, 46. We talked about these earlier. These are simply safety overshoot mechanisms, and we're just going to eliminate those because we know from reading earlier these are in the circuit simply to protect the circuit in case it generates too much electricity. We'll stick them back in later, but for now let's just remove them so we aren't confused by them. Component 26, I believe that's this. Gray calls this a commutator. This is part of the timing mechanism. But component 28, right here, which is a vacuum triode, is sufficient to give us timing impulses for the discharge of our capacitor. So that's sufficient, so we can eliminate 26. And component 48, here. This is just a switching mechanism that allows you to change which battery is being charged and which battery is actually running the circuit. So if we just eliminate that over here, we can simply say that battery 18 is running the circuit and battery 40 is receiving the charging impulses. So now we have what I call the simplified Gray circuit schematic. And this will be helpful in the next analysis. Is everybody okay with these changes? This doesn't change anything in any appreciable way? So here I've placed Tesla's magnifying transmitter circuit next to Gray's cold electricity circuit. And here are the common features of these two. One, they both start off with a source of high voltage direct current. In the case of Tesla, it's a high voltage direct current generator. And in Gray's case, we start with a battery. We chop it through this multi-vibrator, run it through this step-up transformer, rectify it, and charge the capacitor there. Either way, we create high voltage DC. Next in line in the circuit is the capacitor. And we see this in Tesla's circuit, we see this in Gray's circuit. Next thing both circuits do is discharge the capacitor through a spark gap. And that spark gap is characterized by two things. First, by a means to ensure that there's a unidirectional discharge. In other words, that there are no reversals of current in the discharge. And second, that there's a means to control the impulse duration. In the case of Tesla's circuit, we have a magnetic field or hot air or a number of other things across the spark gap to blow out the current as soon as it appears. And the duration of the spark can be also determined by both the strength of the magnetic field and the capacitance of the capacitor. In the case of Gray, we know Gray was using very large capacitors, so he was not dumping the entire capacitor when he discharged. But he was doing two things. He had a resistor, which would limit the current, and he also had this vacuum tube, which he could use to shut off the discharge at whatever pulse duration he was interested in. So all these features are present. Next, we have in both circuits what I will call the preferred location for the electroradiant event. In Tesla's case, it was his 2 turns of stout wire, forming the primary of his electrical transformer. But as we know from reading Jerry Vassilatos, we know that this was not an inductive transformer, that the magnetic coupling in this is very weak from the primary to the secondary. In fact, the primary runs on what Tesla calls his new electrostatic induction rules. And in the case of Gray, the preferred electroradiant event, the location is what he calls his conversion switching tube, which clearly is an electrostatic device, as we read earlier. It is specifically designed to have an explosive electrostatic event radiate away from its central member. The next element is the preferred means to intercept the electroradiant event. In Tesla's case, it's the secondary coil, conical-shaped coil that Jerry talks about, we see in the patents. In Gray's case, he just collects the radiant voltage on these charge-receiving grids. It's important to see that in both of these circuits, there is no direct connection between the source of energy and the receiver element. There is only the electrostatically induced charge on these members. The next element is the connection to the preferred output. In Tesla's case, the output is the connection to the ground and the elevated capacitance, which constitutes his world broadcast system. In Gray's case, he discharged the accumulated charges of his charge-receiving grids into either the jumping magnets or a transformer output that ran his cold electric circuit or into the repulsive magnets in his motor. So again, they each have a preferred means to intercept the electroradiant event and a preferred method to connect it to the output. And finally, in Gray's case, he was able to reconvert some of this excess energy back into ordinary electricity, enough to actually recharge his battery, as we saw earlier from the articles. Tesla was not concerned with this, since his system was designed to be powered by a hydroelectric power plant. So it's clear from this analysis, just in case anybody missed it up till now, that Tesla's magnifying transmitter and Gray's cold electricity circuits are for all intents and purposes the same circuit. They do the same things in the same places in slightly different ways, and they both claim to produce extremely high gains of a cold form of electrostatic energy in the output. Tesla's system was obviously much, much larger. He was planning to power up the whole world. Gray was only planning to power up your home or your car. But for all intents and purposes, these systems function the same and release the same electroradiant gain mechanism. So here again is Gray's circuit schematic from the patent. And again, I've used the term schematic here in quotations, and I'm going to get into exactly why I'm doing that right now.
Let me ask a question.
Please hold it.
Okay.
One of the things that finally allowed me to figure out how this circuit works and what the real schematic is was when I was looking at this. I realized there were a number of basic problems in the way this was drawn. We're going to look at component 42 here. Remember that this is a spark overshoot device. Now, as it's drawn, you can see a little line connecting right there. Connects all the way around and would actually produce a short circuit so that it would not allow capacitor 16 to charge up. So if this was an actual electrical connection, it looks like the circuit wouldn't do what they say it would do. So we clearly see that this part of the drawing has problems. Secondly, component 28. Here. This is defined